Aquí, vale. Uy.
Bueno, pues vamos a dar comienzo. Buenos días de nuevo. Vamos a dar comienzo a la primera de las sesiones plenarias. Yo soy Alario, profesora del Departamento de Geografía de la Universidad de Valladolid, y me han encargado el honor y el placer, fácil además, de presentar a mi querida compañera Mireia Bailina. Mireia, que va a ser la ponente de esta sesión. Es profesora de Geografía del Departamento de Geografía de la Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, doctora en Geografía por esa misma universidad, y ya desde su tesis la línea clara de investigación que ha desarrollado ha sido la que tiene que ver con la geografía feminista, porque su tesis versaba sobre el trabajo de las mujeres en la economía informal en las zonas rurales de Cataluña, Valencia, Andalucía y Galicia. Desde ese momento, desde antes, económica con perspectiva de género, y tiene una ingente cantidad de publicaciones dedicadas al trabajo de las mujeres y la vida cotidiana, especialmente en las áreas rurales, que es un aspecto, una preocupación que compartimos, porque también es mi línea de investigación el tema de la ruralidad, ¿no? Ella también trabaja en temas de representación de género y ruralidad y en las geografías de la infancia y la juventud en zonas rurales y urbanas, ¿no? Siempre, en todo caso, con una perspectiva nítida y clara de género. Aparte de su labor de investigación, ha sido editora de revistas de referencia en nuestra disciplina, especialmente documentos de análisis geográfica, desde 2003 a 2013, que para los que no seáis geógrafos, pues os diré que es una de nuestras revistas fundamentales en la geografía española. Ha sido también editora de la European Urban and Regional Studies, que es una de las también referencias internacionales, miembro del Comité Directivo de la Comisión de Geografía y Género de la Unión Geográfica Internacional. Eso es una representación muy importante en la estructura internacional de la geografía. Ha sido cofundadora y coordinadora del programa de doctorado interuniversitario interdisciplinar de estudios de género, cultura, sociedades y políticas de la Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, coordinadora de programas de doctorado en geografía, cofundadora y profesora del máster interuniversitario interdisciplinar de estudios de las mujeres, género y ciudadanía, desde 2007, que fue cuando se creó, profesora en el minor de las mujeres, en el minor en estudios de género de la UAB, y del grado de estudios socioculturales de género de la UAB. Y actualmente es miembro del Consejo Asesor del Observatorio para la Igualdad de la Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona. Es responsable también desde 2014 del Grupo de Investigación en Geografía y Género de la Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, que es un grupo de investigación reconocido y consolidado y financiado por la Generalitat. Y en el marco de ese grupo de investigación, pues ha organizado también muchos congresos y jornadas, hasta 12, creo, congresos internacionales, la mayoría relacionados con el tema de geografía y género. De hecho, ella pertenece a este grupo de investigación que es el más potente, sin ninguna duda, en la investigación de género en España, ¿no? Y también con una presencia internacional muy significativa. Está acreditada al cuerpo de catedráticas, con lo cual, pues, dentro de poquito ya la podemos presentar de otra manera. Bueno, todo esto, más una lista ingente de publicaciones que podría haber leído, pero que me parece innecesario porque creo que el perfil ya está bastante bien, bastante claro. Pero todo este impresionante currículum no hace honor realmente a la verdad del significado del papel que Mireia tiene en la geografía feminista en nuestro país. Yo creo que el valor es el valor de la referencia. Cualquier persona que se quiera iniciar en la investigación en una geografía con enfoque de género va a tener necesariamente que referirse al grupo de investigación de origen de Mireia, ¿no? Inicialmente dirigido por nuestra querida María Dolores García Ramón, que es la referencia a la geografía feminista inicial allá en los años 80, principios de los 80, ¿no? Desde entonces, cuando cualquiera de las investigadores que hemos entrado poco o mucho en este tema, hemos tenido que referirnos a lo que hacían en ese grupo de investigación. Hoy, continuada esa magnífica labor por Mireia y su equipo de investigación. Por lo tanto, creo que más allá de lo que es la lista de publicaciones, quiero destacar eso, el valor de ser un símbolo, porque cuando, como decía antes Teresa, cuando en otros sitios nos estábamos pegando de alguna manera con la academia para que fueran reconocidas esta línea de investigación, ellas ya lo tenían consolidado, ¿no? Y para nosotros era siempre el punto al que mirábamos, ¿no? Pues con envidia, por supuesto. Es decir, madre mía, ¿cuándo aquí podremos decir que hacemos geografía de género, geografía que feminista, y no nos mirarán raros, ¿no? Bueno, pues ellas ya lo tenían desde hace 40 años. Creo que ese valor, el valor de ser pioneras, el valor de abrir camino, que, bueno, pues ahora más o menos vamos siguiendo todos los demás, es lo que me gustaría más destacar, ¿no? Siguió a esa línea de investigación que abrieron en Cataluña, le siguió Galicia, Andalucía, Madrid, Castilla y León poquito a poco, y otras comunidades, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, yo creo que lo más importante es escucharla. Es una persona que, aparte de ser una magnífica investigadora, es una magnífica oradora, con lo cual seguro que vamos a disfrutar de la intervención. Gracias, Mireia.
Bueno, Milagros.
Hi, Milagros, thank you very much. I think you've exaggerated a lot, but I just hope that I'm up to the task. First of all, I want to thank teacher Eva Cano to have my role here in these feminist geography journeys. In springtime, I was like having a walk in the mountain, leisure, and she rang me up, and I do recall this conversation a lot. I was really looking forward to coming here. So my first thanks go to Eva Cano and Dr. Milagros Alcano, my colleague, also a reference at the University of Valladolid for a long time. So also thank you. I appreciate my director, the Dr. Alario. I'm just grateful to be here and to chat with you all. Right, let's see if I guess it. This is the, I also want to be, I'm so grateful to our research team and the person that founded this, and Maria Dolores García Ramón. Thanks. I'm going to divide my intervention in two parts. One of them is the introduction that gives answers to the title that Eva gave me in origin, just about feminist geography in reality. So first of all, I'm going to talk about this relation, and then the second part, a bit more extensive, with a very best example of this feminist geography, a current one, the analysis of the current processes of return to rurality from feminist geography. I will focus on women going back to the rural area in roles of power in rurality and in Catalonia. Case study. This example can open many areas of analysis, and it may be open to different lines from a very particular example. The second point, going back to rurality and gender, three parts also divided, the dynamics of gender in perspectives of power. Second part, this power position of women can transform into gender equality, and conclusions at last. Right, the relationship between geography and feminism is very simple. Geography is the science relations between people and spaces. People are different, not just by identity, but not just the gender identity, but also age, social, sex, ethnic group, religion, and so on. So they also relate to places in different ways. Being man or female is important in the relationships that the person establishes with the place, so the gender category is relevant within geography. And as gender is a social construction, it varies in space and time. Rurality is also a social construction, so people define reality in different ways according to their role and the place from where they look up. Even people who live in the rural domain refer to it in a changing manner according to the vital cycle or the financial changes in their communities. Mark Mormon used to say in the 1990s that social and economic changes suppose that there's not just one only rural place which is functionally defined as it used to be before in agriculture domain. There are also many social roles that take the same place now. Different manners in which rural is socially construed are described as the rurality arguments. Beliefs and knowledge are the base of our actions, everyday actions that are not independent and that are very intertwined in everyday life. This scope of rurality has released, in a way, geographers, as there is no more a delimitation of rural spaces, although they have to be limited, and here we have an example basis, although they have to be limited, and here we have an example of teachers that do this task really well, as for instance, the Milagros Alario and Fernando Morilero team, who actually studied how to delimit these rural spaces. But this more constructive scope of rurality has released geographers as there is no longer such a worry about delimiting, but they want to understand how people and spaces are identified as rural, or what impact has this in everyday life. Feminist, of course, has a large rural geography and has underlined the dynamics of power within places, showing that place is also an actor in this dynamic. Derek Massey, an international geographer, used to say that any approach to rural implies a spatial. Social means space, and space means social. And all of this is experimented by people in different ways. When feminist geographies came into the rural studies in the 1970s, 80s, according to the context, a bit later that in urban geography, because the thinking fields started later within the urban domain, the main purpose was to bring women into life, which had been neglected beforehand. This geographical experience used to be focused into the male domain, so women were always absent. So some subjects as economy, the use of soil were described as oriented towards men, were not irrelevant to women, and other subjects as domestic work or the care work were always neglected when and are central in women's lives. In this context, geographers put the first scope on agricultural women, which was the main domain for women at the time, and especially focusing on women in family agricultural exploitations, which was predominant where these women carry their research. When they started researching, the first thing that they realized that there was no document in women in agricultural exploitations. And when they went to the statistics, they saw that they were in these categories that said nothing about their professional activity and underestimated, if any. So it was from the field work that they made this inventory about all these everyday activities that women carried out, and not just the inventory of everything they did, but also to focus on the centrality of these rules, and not to see these things as marginal. For women, they saw that their work was tremendously difficult to describe. It was very productive. It was within the public and private domain, and even some activities were carried out at the same time. So when a woman was asked, what do you do from the time you get up, from the time that you go to bed, there was loads of activities, there was this host of things and there was a lot of confusion as to describe it. For instance, if the woman had to cook, it was a reproductive role, but if she was cooking for the family and for workers in the exploitation, what was it? Reproductive or not? Like when they were working in the garden, if it was for selling, it was productive. But if it was also for self-consumption, what was it? Was it productive or reproductive? Not to mention the considering of public and private space. In exploitation, it's very difficult to separate public from domestic, because domestic is always there, and the household is private, is from the place, the garden, is it private, is it public, it's very complicated. You've got an example here from an interview to a woman in Galicia in an agricultural exploitation, this research team that Milagros was talking about. There was some research in Galicia, and this lady asked to this question, well, what, from the time you get up, from when you go to bed, what do you do? And this is, we transcribe literally, so let's see what she said. She said, well, at 7 o'clock, I wash and I put the cows outside. I get the cows inside, I milk them. If somebody might help me, maybe not. Then I feed them, then I take them out. I have to clean, I have to feed the pigs, the chicken, then I have breakfast. And then during breakfast, I start cooking for lunch. So, and then I bring the cows, then I have to go and get pastures, and then it delays the household work. I come back, I prepare lunch, then we just rest a bit, and then we have to get we go to the field, and then we until 6, and then we go back to doing the task at the house, and then the farming, and then dinner, and then like that every day. So these women, she could be on the, and you know, in the statistics as just help. We're not just housewife. Both categories do not describe all these tasks that women have and don't get any pay for, and they are clearly subordinated to the one of the male worker. Not bringing this work of women into light in this reproduction was crucial, because they construed the concept of work, understood as all activity for rendering services or benefits both in public and private domain, regardless of their role. They also show the connection between public, private, reproduction, production. So the deconstruction of binarity comes from earlier, and it also brought to light a lot of invisible work that women take on. But not just that, just understanding work in the older sense, in incorporating the family unit as within the research of geography, not research on until then. And the relationship of power was to understand the family agricultural exploitation. It's very difficult to understand how these family exploitations work, which is what we work on, not just in Spain, in Europe. It's very difficult to understand if one doesn't acknowledge the work of women and other members of the family. And then there was a second phase, the necessity to explain the reasons for these differences and inequalities observed. The focus went from description to explanation, from women to gender. It was as important to research on these difficulties and problems that women face, but also to understand why they existed. And in order to understand, they place their lives in these gender differences rules. So the study of the position of women in agriculture just gave this theoretical success, and gender as something construed socially, and these facts, we went from a research based on how women were just placed in this agricultural exploitation, defined by ambitions and perspectives of men, to a research describing the life within the exploitation, where the ambitions of women were also within this context. These are just the beginning of a long trajectory of dialogue between women and rurality that evolve according to the social and economic changes in these dynamics, to new theoretical perspectives, and also the role of women in society. Roles and relations of inequality have been described, and they've also been found in rurality as the structuring the market, the work markets, access to positions of power, and so on. But also the research has been open to the construction of rurality. For instance, how women are not an homogeneous group, and also what factors comprise their identity in rural areas. For instance, assuming how the wife and mother role within the rural field limits women in the decision-making processes in order to carry on paid work outside the households, or also different lifestyles. For instance, a single mother, somebody who want to divorce, want to be a lesbian, who is a lesbian. Women were not authorized; they were marginal. They are recognized within the community, but they have different perspectives. But the dominant role on women within the center of the rural community puts other aspects of their identity as marginal. For instance, a professional career might be altered when talking about the rural woman. In this stage, other rurals have their voice. People who, according to their sex, age group, social, are marginal, and they have been socially excluded. Migrants, homosexuals, women. These forgotten people studies have enlarged the scope of rurality and has allowed to operate these power relations between people and rural institutions. In any case, Feminist geographers have contributed to rural geography under the assumption that human subjects in rural studies is masculine, underlining the need to use gender as a category crucial in all these studies. This is a contribution epistemological, because it's not just adding gender, but also reformulating knowledge, disciplinary knowledge. There will be a revolution from the point of view of the categories, of methodology, of research fields, and to reformulating research carried on from another feminist and critical perspective, and so on. Today, the critical perspective is on agriculture, masculinity, sexuality, poverty, transport, extractivism, violence, and so on, clearly intertwined with other axes of inequality. This intersectional theory, as Professor Cano mentioned just before, and of course in subjects which is now more mediatic, which is depopulation and repopulation in the rural areas. Once research the cases and consequences of depopulation of the rural areas, and this is the rural repopulation which I'm going to start to talk about right now. Right, of course, at the beginning of the 21st century are marked by some a return to the countryside areas in order to define the rural spaces of the global north. These movements come out in this stage where the rural spaces open up in each region, in Spain, within Europe, and for new relationship between rural areas and the cities, and the concepts and a renovation of these concepts. The immigration models, rural ones, are inspired in the cultural ideas about idealized rurality. The new rural practices go beyond chasing rural. These new worries about climatic change, finances, sustainability explain to a large extent these return movements, not all of them, but many of them, just fueled by this new technology that mean that we can live within the rural areas and be connected. According to several authors, we talk about a paradigm change where the pillars of the consume and production axis show cracks, and the social values construes are inspired by new attitudes towards work, natural resources, and the space. The return to the country areas in Europe has many characteristics. The profiles are normally higher educated women with important barriers to access to land, access to capital and to the markets, and with business models multifunctional. It is young adults who decide to live and work within the rural areas and think about the potential of each domain in order to focus, put them in the political scope. All taking into account that women have immigrated to the rural areas, and especially young women. These women going back to the rural areas with higher educated women in Catalonia and Galicia show that this generation of women also saw the rural areas as a place of production and innovation, define the arguments that only shows rural spaces as stuck in time and production, just related to leisure, which These qualitative data show quantitatively, but it's very slowly. In Catalonia, the demographic factors previous to pandemic show a growth in rural population, especially considering immigration, and also rural space is still elderly and very masculine predominant. So that we can see some examples. I'll go back to my argument later. I'll show you a map as a geographer, which I like. This is the interior Catalonia. That's as the phrase that elaborated this map is the expression of rurality. We see a huge difference between west and east. The red is all the urban areas, light green and dark green is related to population, number of inhabitants. So this is all a social construction according to population, but this light yellow is under 5,000, and green is also rural, but then all the red is urban areas of Barcelona and all of the capital cities and if we add this map to the next one, the urban distancing, which is another way to read the impacts of this immigration of the journeys into the urban areas from the rural areas. We can also find a very similar map. The bluer ones are the ones more distant from the urban areas, and the ones like more yellow, more like sort of orangey closer. Well, to see where this empty rural is in some areas of the Pyrenees. As I said earlier, the map here, this rurality map, if we cross it with the elderly, the aging one, we see that the aging, like over 65 and over aging plus 85 plus is clearly rural. This line east-west is very clear, except for some area of interest as the Val d'Aran, where has retained young population, maybe because of services, because it is a very touristic region. So the Cerdanya region, right? However, as I said earlier, data on young people under 35, despite being 2.6 points under the urban space, have been stable during 2018 and 19, and this age group shows a parity between male and female. This data reflects the tendency tends to a repopulation in the rural domain. This COVID has also underlined these demographic changes in some rural areas. In this map, we see the growth, this demographic growth interannual from 2020-21. So we see the COVID impact here, and we see this repopulation, this rural repopulation. This map expresses the relative values. So we see in red, we see the increases of population in relative values. So even if there are not many people, for instance, in the Pyrenees region, it is a large increase in relative value. So we see the increases have been developed in these rural areas, and also we'll see in the metropolis or area of Barcelona and the coast. if we see in absolute values, we see a very important information in total values. The population that went into the rural areas have been in the peripheral in areas of Barcelona and the coast, because many times the second residence matters. I mean, a lot of people who had a second home in the coast have all this Costa Brava, all this arch of the metropolitan region of Barcelona. All these second residents, all the second homes have become the first home for these people, and also with some absolute values important in this Val d'Aran, in the Cerdanya region, very touristic, Ripollès, for instance, or l'Empordà. Right. There's also increases, but the scenario is very sort of orangey red. So my colleagues talk whether there can be a repopulation, a rural repopulation. In any case, this historic depopulation process, rural, has been very much focusing in gender and age, because it was young women. Youth immigration and overrepresentation in feminine has been crucial within the life of young people. For this reason, the recent research tries to move politics of immigration and re-immigration, developing welcoming from the gender role, a feminist and political scope focusing on financial problems in order to understand this immigration tendencies, as my colleagues in Hungary, for instance, and the regional contracts where migration of women to rural areas, underlining to which extent the equality policies within the rural field can be useful to focus on women, as they do in Norway. A recent study on women in rural areas in Europe have very ambivalent conclusions in this, and they underline the return of higher educated women to the fields. Women prepare in order to develop agricultural genders, roles, and creating work, and also managing sustainability and with resources to establish alliances, professional and private. But also, it also underlines and solves issues as many working women are still invisible to the studies, that women participate a lot in informal economy more than men, and despite all these gender policies implemented from the 1990s within the rural domains, their effective is almost null. This recent plan of the recuperation by the Spanish government, trying to implement access on all these plans, trying to recuperate and resiliency, is focusing on incorporating the small municipalities in this digital and green recuperation, including women. One of these transversal purposes, this one in yellow, is getting rid of these breaches between gender according to the masculinity of territory, the lack of opportunities for women, the loads of care that women face when talking about aging population, and also domestic violence. We have to say here in this phrase, I don't know whether I'm not reading correctly here, is that the women carers are not because of the aging of population, but the unequal contracts that traditionally makes women focus on this. So this is I mean, this government that is progressist and very sensible to this, I mean, this should be, I mean, this should be rewritten, I think, and also on the international scope. These, all these declarations that are not new within the frame of the said institution, Spanish and European, might indicate now an acknowledgement of the despite the rural tendencies in the European agenda streaming, the implementation has had barely an impact, and the same thing happens internationally. Caroline Sachs and others show that the changes in the gender rules in the rural area, as much as the agriculture change, the production, social climate change, the pandemic, and international and national policies. However, they underline that women still experience inequality, limited access to land, to capital, or to credits, and pressures in order to comply with masculine roles within the rural areas. This shows that social changes are slow, and it doesn't look like, it looks like we haven't gone very much from Esther Boserom in the 1970s, women's roles in rurality, where she dealt with problems in the rural field for women, always underlining this subjugation of women and this unequal division of tasks, which is so is such a historic concept. I always tell my students, I mean, it's, however, it is still in the scope. Key concepts as the work distribution and family work in order to give a value to these women working in the rural areas. These advances do not hide the perpetuation of gender roles and the patriarchal structures within the rural field, and this worry is in the agenda for all of us. Right, I get into the case study that I wanted to show you this example. In order to show this inequality, I want to show some gender dynamics and transformation spaces in professional women that went back to the rural areas in Catalonia that work in public and private institutions in post of power, high-achieving women. These are the women that we've been talking about. They are women who are, they are over high-achieving women within the rural areas, and we want to see what gender dynamics they face in their everyday life and what subjects they show in the policy agenda. These women deconstruct the rural role traditional, just a wife and mothers, as said, they were traditionally. These 6 women that work and live in these rural areas in Barcelona, between 12 and 50,000 people in the 3 provinces of Catalonia. 2 are mayors and 1 is a former mayor. 1 is responsible for communication of a museum and a writer, and 1 is a regional director for projects, and 1 sub-delegates of patrimony of the bishopry. 3 have went back to the place where they belong to. 2 of them were born in Barcelona, and 1 of them decided to go back to the countryside. All of them have higher education studies, but within very difficult stage. 4 of them have between 1 and 3 children with heterosexual. 1 is homosexual and 1 is single and has no children. The research has been done in methodology, equality research within the fields, the work field of these women. The increase of the representation of women in political charges in rural areas is still very slow. As Irene, former mayor, when I started, I was the only delegate. Before, in the mayor board, there was just one woman, and now there's just one. Except for that, they're all men. In this leader project network, they're all women except for the chairman, who is a man, and also the chairman of the board. The people researching this explain the underrepresentation of women as not wanting to participate in politics, and also the difficulties in conciliation between private and public life, but also all the difficulties of women getting into policy, chauvinism, and all this patriarchal scope, which translates into the power except for only and exclusively for men. In this line, Irene underlines that, yes, I was mayor for 4 years, I did a lot of things, but the mafia just got me. And when we asked Muriel if she could, Muriel is the one, the leader product manager, if she could take her boss role, she said yes, but you have to go to a re-election because they are elected charges, you have to go to a list, and I don't want to do with it. Of all these 3 groups, there are 4 who are female manager, but all the rest are male. The cultural practices every day are an important role in production and reproduction rules in Catalonia. Men are normally not questioned. They dominate the politics, right history, and legitimate all their activities. So men just join between them, they know each other, they talk between them, and they elect each other, one another. So it is the resonance between masculinity, work, and territory that gives this masculine role legitimacy. So despite all the contribution of women to local politics, the decision making is still unchanged, and sometimes it just reinforces the inequality and differences in role between men and women, and this patriarchal role. Carla, of this bishopry study, is in the mountain is very reluctant to women participating in this countryside policy. Women are underrepresented, and it will continue to be that for a long time, This interviewee has been valued a lot more by the bishopry than from the administration, despite certain misogyny from the church. Is slightly overrepresented as compared to the administration. As for the mountain territories, as Ms. Pallares, our colleague, that you know, other activities of leadership as bio are more inclusive. For instance, motivation to take on responsibility charges come from the service responsibility derived from this connection, this emotional connection with the domain. According to Martina, the mayor is something that you do because you love your village and you think that you can contribute with something. It doesn't really look like something chase. I mean, you don't think that you're going to be the mayor of your town. They came to see me and I said yes. So even sometimes conditioned to some results, like positive results by the community. Irene decided that she would try for 3 months, and if it was something that I didn't learn anything from, I would just quit. Care of others, worrying after them, is a very strong effect locally. People associate the community with care, being able to listen to people and helping. The interaction, the social interaction, participating in projects, and participating in and also identifying certain domains as material spaces for community, including places, natural resources and infrastructures. According to Martina, the idea is to try to create a dynamic village. We have a lot of entities and we try to maintain. There's some authors that think that women are more have a bigger capacity than men to face certain problems, which is something that derive from their role of reproductive. So the centrality of economy in women's life explains the implication of this in the development of rural local communities. Others signify the associationist of women in order to break up with the symbolic masculine power and invisibility of women's work. The women networks create trust, reciprocity and compromise. Solid tools to share their knowledge, increase visibility and diminish the power of men. These networks are more powerful if local institutions have experience with other works building like a social bridge. The experience with women positioned within power domains in the rural give a greater sustainability than financial. Martina estimates that the village is more, and if we create institutions within it, we naturalize it. We are very happy to be a village of 1,200 people. She thinks that is the one that still looks after the environment. We're losing it now because we are living off an activity that doesn't look after the environment. It comes from this compromise with the territory, for instance, the centrality of the rural activities. Serotonin rhythm says that empowering of women is related to the alimentary security and nutrition within the household. The differences of gender and the exposure to agricultural chemicals derive in infections and diseases in the rural areas. So in the political area, we underline this relation between gender, health and security. Irene, for instance, says that unless we stop thinking that everything has to be solved by us, the people that come from the outside, and until we don't how we define how we earn our living, we won't go far. All the interviewees value positively their social role, and they think they have had no difficulties, but they've had to work a lot for it. Carla explains, she said, I've worked a lot, so I have no timetable. If I had to go to a smaller village at 11 at night, I had to IU days. If I had to do a meeting at weekend, I days. Martina also coincides in having no difficulties, despite being aware that if you're a man, nobody questions you, and you are more authoritative. But if you're a female, you are a maniac. Sometimes you refer to, "Oi, girl, excuse me, I am the mayor." These masculine roles that exclude women from the power domains have not disappeared, but they modify to have the same impact. So probably that's why women have no trouble when sitting in the church, because they live it more naturally. As Irene says, we don't care about the chair, but they just go along with everything. You go there, you see that there's nothing you can do, and you just quit and do something else. The resistant roles within the work field are also taken to the household. Carla knows that she works a lot, and her personal domain has had an effect on that. Her husband apparently is happy with her working, but they understand that they have their masculine base. They just have a girl, and he's contributing with work, but sometimes this forces crisis in women and in men, because men just suffer a crisis when they see this imbalance. Muriel, for instance, underlines that her husband is okay when she leaves, but if she leaves for a few days, for instance, she has to sort out everything. But he doesn't have a problem with me leaving. So the woman knows, is aware that the hierarchical relationship of within the matrimony knows. I mean, they know that this has an impact, and always women have to reproduce and produce through another woman, a caretaker or anything. We're still blamed to be acting outside the box and assuming these masculine roles. These mentioned practices make us aware that there are many inequalities within the role of women, but the legitimate occupation of these women and the everyday work task also make spaces of transformation for gender relations, more equality from the ground. Training is crucial when trying to build identities within the rural field. Women have understood how to analyze from the urban scope. The social capital empowers them and makes them agents for change. And that improves the role, the look that they have upon themselves in very hostile media. Despite all the difficulties that women face in these high achievement positions, women are still in the work markets in worse conditions than male. Carla says, I have a degree, but my salary is not of someone that has a degree, and her husband is still the one that brings more money. And to the salary breach, there's also the very few advances in this inequality when women in the household, when they always work a lot more. When you have a family, men are always easier at large. Women have always this feeling of not reaching everything. Men don't ever get that. I mean, that doesn't mean that men don't work, but they don't have this. Cristina says, I've not been able to get rid of the caretaking. This of women with agency explains why this relationship within the rural areas are sustained by the traditional gender roles. Women are not an homogeneous group, not even in the rural area. I mean, Irene recognizes advances in equality. Girls are trained, but not their husband in some occasions. They don't accept it. And sometimes we have these matrimonies with second or third marriages with South American women. There was particularly this case of a man that was asked about his Ecuadorian women, and he says, well, that was fine because you can beat her up and nothing happens. Women subject to domestic violence in rural areas, this study concludes where in this inequality of gender, the sexist roles and violence against women, the economic financial dependence, what will they say, the dependence of the woman, of the man that beats you up, the lack of acknowledgement and the lack of trust in the system explains these women in these domestic violence domains. Irene's says that following the system of domestic violence in Catalonia, in Tarragona, in her area, you found bullying issues where they did not want to go to the head office and say, these are some of these this is the scenario in some of the vulnerable domains, as the case just before mentioned. I'm just going to wrap up. Looking for a better quality of life has started these migrant movements towards the rural areas, underlined by this COVID situation related to bio, to environment, also related to this urban, idealized rural life, where the lifestyle, this high lifestyle is only at this, within this, the reach of a few. This is a tension of between these production and reproduction roles, visualizing the agenda of women in this domain and their importance within the community. These feminized roles are even more significant in this crisis scenario, making obvious that the current situation makes women as a central role as the sustain for the family. For these rural women who are on the first line of the essential occupations, to the entrepreneurial women in exploitation, agricultural exploitation, and who are able to reconcile private and public, and this mess is a challenge to be able to maintain with all these public and private scopes. The rise of remote work, for instance, has an impact in all these social benefits, but they can also undermine the health of women and make an evolution to the more traditional homes. The idea of construction from the ground is a shared idea between these interview women in the rural areas. Is very important, this belonging, this community concepts, and they're very crucial for this everyday life. And as Martina said, it's indispensable to be part of an entity and to collaborate in the municipality issues, and everybody does it, even the new ones. It's a very good atmosphere. Being accepted in a place may help to build community and to build the social capital to act. The people just arrive or just return to the rural areas might be ambiguous, as being inside or outside the community, but not belonging to this completely. And they can also experiment this social crash when they see that they stand out. Carla just arrived from Barcelona, had trouble make fortune friends in the rural area. It's a very exclusive area where they're very happy with what they are and what they do, and they have no curiosity by these strangers. They see you more as a threat than as an opportunity, as an asset. They always look at you if you're under trained, overqualified. You having like an urban scope, or Cristina, the mayor, who relates this with the indispensable aspects of establishing relationship. If you live in a town, you also make social relationship, but here you have to live with the people. These aspects of relation, this imposed relationship, is good to naturalize social relations within the rural areas and see the opportunity for change. The arrival of new migrants, the return, the everyday commuters change the notions of belonging and by the own community, and have underlined that rural spaces are dynamic and changing and builds amongst people, and therefore offer a good laboratory for the transformation of traditional gender relations. Several studies underline the importance of women participating in local institutions in order to overcome patriarchal barriers within the study, taking on key roles, reinforces the acceptance as political actors on behalf of men. the feminization of rural co-governing gave women an opportunity to gain visibility and to empower other women, and also entails transformation processes in gender equality with women as active agents. Attention to women with arguments in the professions who are representatives of new gender identity within the rural areas, despite them not identifying themselves with the political collective gender role. This may happen with women in our role. Irene says that when she stepped into power, into politics, I went to an interview and I was asked whether I was a feminist, and I said no, I was of a large family and Republican, and I thought that that was enough. I thought that they wouldn't ring me, but they were thrills. Many of the messages of rural women may look in favour and at the same time construe the agenda. They think they represent this feminist identity, so it's crucial for them to take a look of what they are, who they are, and where they're going to, and the places that they occupy are platforms for change. And to conclude, the rural space is not natural, it's a built space. It is crucial to have a critical look on how the community works. The not a recent relationship between women and men are construed by everyday life and in the work market, in local politics, family, the attitudes of one to others, as these activities take place in a spatial roles. The roles are normally locally construed. Women, high-achieving women have to go back to the rural areas. Social, financial relations are construed by power, who privilege certain subjects, as we saw. Women convinced of what they can bring to this change of paradigm, fueled by this crisis, the pandemic and so on, are also aware of the discrimination that affect them, despite years of policies towards gender equality. Maybe an agenda from the ground may do more for the transformation of inequality, power, relationship in the rural areas. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Pues muchas gracias, Mireia. Ha sido un placer, como siempre, escucharte. Bueno, yo creo que ha salido una cantidad de temas importantes todos y de gran interés para debatir. Entiendo que tenemos un ratito todavía para poder abrir un debate. La gente que está presencial aquí lo tiene más fácil. No sé en el resto cómo lo tenemos que hacer. Vosotros me vais diciendo si hay que dar paso a otras personas. ¿Alguien de los presentes, para empezar el debate, quiere intervenir? Teresa, Gemma.
Hola, buenos días. Bueno, ha sido un placer escucharte y doy las gracias también a Eva y a todas las de la cátedra por organizar esto. Bueno, yo soy miembro de la cátedra, pero también soy una mujer de pueblo, del mundo rural, y cuando oigo a alguien desde fuera definir lo que he vivido desde dentro, me resulta curioso, ¿no? Porque lo has vivido con tanta naturalidad que dices, ¿cómo pueden definirlo así, ¿no? Entonces sí que es cierto que el mundo rural existe mucho sexismo, mucha diferencia de roles, mucha estereotipación, un mundo totalmente diferente para hombres y para mujeres. Estoy de acuerdo contigo que poco se ha avanzado desde 1970, este libro que has puesto hasta ahora. Me gustaría saber la opinión como investigadora de si consideras, porque yo llevo observando años, aunque no es mi ámbito de investigación, como que hay muchas palabras, pero no observo evolución ninguna. Voy todos los fines de semana, vivo en el pueblo 2 o 3 días a la semana porque trabajo aquí y mi pueblo está al lado. Entonces, me gustaría saber la opinión de casi ¿qué se está haciendo? Si consideras que se está haciendo algo para que realmente esa situación que habéis definido también cambie, o si realmente se conoce la situación pero es una situación estancada, o realmente hay situaciones que den luz a que esto pueda algún día ser un poquito más igualitario. La opinión un poquito. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias por tu comentario y tu
Thanks very much for your comment and your question, and I'm glad you are the origin and you've lived under these circumstances. All social changes are very slow, much slower than technological. We can see, right, and even more so when we talk about privilege. When someone is not privileged, it's hard to get rid of it. Knowledge exists. I mean, we are in this over-informed society, this equality concepts. I mean, knowledge is there, but what's important is the everyday practices, the everyday. From these women, women inside the political systems, how these women take agency in the companies and the decision-making post. This is important to get inside, and in order to enter, they have to go in with very agency and resistance, because they face all these barriers. But on a positive key, there's been many changes, I mean, otherwise they would not be there, would they? I mean, these women, the mothers were the ones that departed. If they go back, it's because they feel empowered. They don't fear. This doesn't mean that once in the post, either as a farmer or a company, a businesswoman or a mayor, does not have to bear with discrimination and does not have to elaborate strategies of resistance, or like how to resist and how to cope. Yeah, I mean, there's energies that they should not have to be deployed within these questions, and they could be spent in something more positive. I mean, this is also discrimination, that they have to use time to resist. The important thing is that they cope, that they bear with it. Let's see how much you can take. Because there's many issues. I mean, there's a first line of care and everyday domestic work, and to see what an impact this may have in their health. So we have to look on a long-term basis and be optimistic, at least in the mirror that can be for other women in the position. I mean, they're taking the roles that their mothers did not want to. I mean, they escape from them. They come back with another like social capital and training and new ideas, and I think they're very powerful agents. And my worry, my concern is to know the level of tolerance, and to see whether on the other side the loss of privilege is also assumed, or at least to share. I don't know whether that answers your question. I mean, I am optimistic. Sometimes you can say that the advances have been very few, but reality, everyday practice, and the impact in colleagues and in children may do a lot more. I don't know.
También mi opinión.
I'll also give my opinion. In geography, as in other fields of knowledge, in research, there's always these doubts with whether to focus on structure, dominance, or the abnormal elements in this structure. I mean, the structure is still patriarchal, both in urban and rural. Urban is more obvious because there are difficulties. A woman within the urban area has better access to, in order to work, have this conciliation, this life private and public, but the structure is still patriarchal because society in itself is patriarchal, as well as the work structure within my fields, within the rural areas, is mainly patriarchal. But if we look at the spotlights in these like obscure fields, as Mireia was saying, if we say in these, nevertheless, very small changes, there are some, and we see them more significantly in the rural areas than in urban. The incorporation of women in these completely brand new processes in this region of Castilla and León is not very technological. I mean, we're always in arrears, but we are detecting many cases of women that are innovating. And when I mean innovation, I'm not talking about technology. There's many ways of innovation, social processes, manners. For instance, agriculture is normally been hyper-productive from the 1970s in the 20th century. We've got many more women now. They're less like overproductive. They care more about sustainability and short circuits, production and commercialization. All of that is innovation and it's tremendous. And this model is the one that fixes population in these rural areas and empowers women within these financial fields and maybe on a larger scale within the social scope. So I always want to be in the positive, especially at my age. But yeah, I want to be optimistic, positive.
Agustín.
Muchísimas gracias, Mireia. Ha sido clarísima la intervención y muy didáctica, y también a Milagros, ¿no?, por todo lo que lleva realizando durante tanto tiempo. No he oído ninguna experiencia que tenga que ver con lo educativo, no con lo formal reglado, sino con lo que podría ser una actuación de intentar quitar esas tensiones entre las habitantes de zonas rurales, ¿no?, y esas personas que se incorporan. Muchas de ellas has hablado que ya pertenecían a esa zona rural, pero por ejemplo hay experiencias muy interesantes que introducen, por ejemplo, la exposición de creación artística, el llamamiento a creadores, a pintores, a escultores en diferentes zonas de la España rural, más concretamente en Andalucía, conocemos varias, ¿no? Y en ese sentido me gustaría que nos comentaras alguna experiencia que dentro del entorno de Cataluña, donde ha habido una renovación pedagógica desde siempre, a través de Rosa Sensat, de todas las escuelas de verano, que luego también escuelas de profesorado, ¿no?, que luego se trasladaron también al centro. ¿Qué iniciativas puede haber precisamente para crear esos puentes entre lo que habéis analizado más desde el punto de vista de la economía rural, ¿no?, con lo que podría ser el puente que se crea a través de experiencias educativas alternativas al sistema convencional, ¿no?, de enseñanza formal reglada?
Sí, sí, gracias por esta cuestión.
Thanks for this question that you just introduced. It is true that in these periods in force now, these projects that we continue, we are also analyzing and focusing on these projects, these educational projects, also in the rural fields, also conducted by women who, for instance, I'm thinking a woman that I was with not long ago, she's an archaeologist, and they made this network of education, introducing archaeology as gender-based in rural areas, in rural schools, archaeology with a feminist perspective and care and so on. So this is developed in rural area, which is there in these more concrete actions. It would be an intervention within these fields, in this domain of archaeology. There's also women and men involved in these creation spaces as artists, co-working spaces that sometimes they take on, they profit from industrial states and areas, mining. These spaces were not used anymore, and they've been reused again for meeting artists, creative people that from there also participate in these territories in different manners. So they're also current in this line of work. Yeah.
¿Alguien quiere participar? No sé. O no sé de la
Anybody else want to participate?
Bueno, gracias, Mireia, por tu exposición. Me preguntaba dos cuestiones, por si las han trabajado y demás. Una tiene que ver justamente con esta idea de las masculinidades y si van a renunciar a sus privilegios o no. Si han hecho entrevistas a estos hombres como para ver si son conscientes de estas redes, de que hablan entre ellos, eligen entre ellos o no. Y por otro lado, si en los relatos de estas mujeres han aparecido como redes de acompañamiento entre ellas o cuando se encuentran con estas barreras, qué estrategias tienen que no sean como tan individuales de cómo gestionar el hogar y tal, sino si hay, no sé si en términos de organización, pero al menos, no sé, alguna compañera con quien hablar y pensar estas problemáticas. Gracias.
A ver, empezando por esta segunda.
Starting with this second,
Yo hablo por las mujeres que nosotras
I talk on behalf of the women that I've worked with, or we've worked with. It is actually true concerning these women in the politics fields. We've talked about with a lot of women. They establish these networks. They're very linked to presidential and local networks, internationally also. This is now open, so they do have very powerful networks of relations, more from the professional point of view than political, feminist or gender-based, for the time being. Although they have a very powerful discourse, argument, they know where they are. It's nothing new to them. They're very aware where they are. But it is true that when we actually ask them if they belong to associations or if they have created networks of mutual work, not many of them, as in a formal idea of militance or activism. I don't mean that they don't do politics. These are another professional networks. They're also political, despite being professional networks, but and their participation might be a more feminist. I mean, this is another subject, but for what we understand as a formal network of feminist activists, no, more professional. As masculinity, we also work with men, not so many. We have to learn more in order to take and make a better review of the rural communities, which is one of our purposes. We've worked with them too. And we see that the argument is there, responsibility, they know the argument, but in practice, we don't see everything that we would like to see, even men that participate. There are, I don't know if it's resistance or there are very interiorized practices. They're very difficult to break up, to change with the practices, with what's behind the practices, with privileges, even in young men, very young and very powerful. Considering, for instance, that entrepreneuring, they think it's like DNA, has got the DNA of male, for instance. Very, very overqualified 25-year-old men who developed this learning as something genetically masculine and so on. So there's a lot of work to be done within this field, but we also like to talk about what we know best, and here we need to learn a bit more about masculinity in order to work, but we're working on it. Thank you, Magdalena.
¿Alguien quiere participar? No sé, ¿podemos dar entrada a de la gente que está en streaming o no? No. Pues a mí, ya sé que tenemos que terminar, pero quiero plantear una cosita a Mireia, porque me parece que queda un poco...
Right, we have to ask to Mireia something that I think that we haven't dealt with. It's identities, rural identity. A few years back, a lot was talked about rural women, the idea of the women in the village. This slogan is that we worked on about 15 years back. I detect now that young female who live within the rural areas and rooted in the rural areas, not just a new population that would have more. They don't feel rural, they don't identify themselves with this concept of rural women. In many of these posts, we change the name. We talk about resident women within the rural areas because it's not part of this identity. Has this changed? I mean, this has to do with the concept that we have and might be rejected. No, we've also found that, Milagros, and I think this is a clear idea of what I said at the beginning. What we understand as rural, urban, exactly, all these so like flows, one thing, the other. What identify us, or what identifies the experience of people currently is mobility, transit from one place to another, transit physical and virtual. We move all the time, and not just the people that live in rural areas, not isolated. I think what identifies us as citizens is the experience of mobility, everyday mobility from present and virtual. We're everywhere. So I think these women, they don't see the concept of like being just belonging to one space, and it might be partly because of this idea, because of this flow and this concept of going everywhere and anywhere. Yeah. This is a bit of a strange scene because they take pride in doing new things in a rural area that they defend, but they don't identify with that rurality. But because all they have, they rely on a huge urban background too. Obviously, the high achieving ones, they've traveled. Their heads are filled with other experiences. They lived other things, other situations. I mean, we do ask these questions to them, and the definitions are very, very. You find a host of them. And, I'm just going to say these anecdotes. I put the photo here. I didn't put this photo, but I could have actually brought this. A colleague of mine and I were invited to do this, like to these chats in the Pyrenees, in the mountain area. It was January 4 or 5 years back, just before COVID. And it was about rural women, this like generic title, so we went there. And we couldn't get there because the snow, I mean, there was this snow collapse, so we couldn't get there, so it had to be reprogrammed. But this gave way to like redirect the situation because some young people, boys and girls, invited us from a very political, progressist, radical, political association, which is ARRAM, which is one of the factions of the CUP, which is candidacies of political unity. I mean, these people are very radical, very extreme left-wing. So we were invited there to talk about rural women and the poster, I mean, the leaflets, when I saw all these flyers everywhere in all the shops, it was in the Seu d'Urgell, and when I saw this rural woman, a very elderly woman with her hat, with the straw hat, dressed in black. I mean, you might figure, right? Rural, a very elderly woman. And I was thinking, gosh, how can it be possible? How is it possible that in the imagery of these boys and girls, radical youth, in their imagery, they identify rural women with these elderly women, when some of the interviewees were young women. I mean, if they think that, if these women think that we put up these posters, they're just as young as us. It was shocking. Of course, we couldn't get there, so there was time for us to say, right, if you can change the leaflets, the flyer, it would be nice, and they replace them with these, like, with the fist up. It was much better. It was much more in tune. But it was like going back in history. So that made me think of identity, how images are very powerful when, and all these concepts are still coming from the past and stopping progress. It's an anecdote. Well, thank you very much, Mireia. I don't think we've got time for anything else. We've covered all these issues, all these topics with this change. The interest of the auditory has been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Gracias.
Bueno, os animamos a bajar justo aquí, debajo de esta magnífica sala, a tomar un aperitivo y compartir impresiones, ¿vale? Ya está puesto el catering. A disfrutar.